Sarah Chen stood before the towering vault door, her hand hovering over the biometric scanner. Behind her, the last remnants of Earth's botanical heritage lay carefully preserved in countless cryo-containers, seeds, spores, and tissue samples from every surviving plant species on the dying planet. As she pressed her palm against the cool surface of the scanner, she couldn't help but think of her grandmother's small rooftop garden in Singapore, now buried under toxic ash like everything else. The vault door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, locking away humanity's green legacy aboard the horizon. Through the reinforced windows of the massive colony ship, the ravaged surface of Earth stretched endlessly below, a wasteland of gray and brown where vibrant ecosystems had once thrived. Only the massive environmental shields over the last remaining cities broke the monotony of destruction. "Dr. Chen," a voice called from behind her. "Final checks are complete. Captain Matthews requests all senior staff in the bridge." Sarah turned to find Marcus Rodriguez, the ship's head of security, waiting at attention. His dark uniform bore the silver tree emblem of the Earth Preservation Force, a reminder of their desperate mission. She nodded, taking one last look at the vault before following him through the sterile corridors of the ship. The Horizont had been humanity's most ambitious project, a self-sustaining colony ship designed to carry 50,000 people to a new home among the stars. Now it was their last hope. As they walked, Sarah observed the organized chaos of final preparations. Civilians were being guided to their cryopods, children clutching precious toys and family mementos, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. The bridge hummed with activity when they arrived. Captain Alina Matthews stood at the central command station, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her weathered face illuminated by the glow of holographic displays. She acknowledged Sarah with a brief nod. "Dr. Chen, your vault status." "Sealed and secure, Captain. All specimens are in stasis, and the automated systems are functioning at optimal levels." Sarah's voice carried the weight of responsibility. Those seeds represented more than just plants. They were the promise of future forests, farms, and gardens. They were hope itself. "Good." Matthews turned to address the assembled senior staff. "The latest atmospheric readings confirm our worst fears. The degradation is accelerating. We have a 48-hour window before global conditions become unsurvivable. We launch in 6 hours." The news landed like a physical blow. They had known this was coming, had planned for it, but the finality of the announcement still stung. Sarah thought of the billions who hadn't made it onto the selection lists, who would face the end on the surface below. Her parents had been among them, insisting their place be given to a younger family with children. As the meeting continued, alarms suddenly blared through the ship. Red warning lights pulsed along the corridors, and the holographic displays erupted with urgent data streams. Multiple breaches detected in Shield Complex 7. A technician shouted, "The Sydney Dome is failing." Matthew's response was immediate. "Move up launch preparations. All civilians to cryopods now. Essential personnel to emergency stations." Her eyes met Sarah's. "Dr. Chen, get to your vault. If those specimens are compromised, we lose everything." Sarah ran. Behind her, she could hear Marcus falling into step, his boots echoing on the metal deck. The ship shuddered as the primary engines began their warm-up sequence, far ahead of schedule. Through the windows, she caught glimpses of chaos. The massive environmental shield over Sydney flickering and fragmenting. Toxic storms rushing in to fill the gap. They reached the vault level to find warning lights flashing around the main door. The environmental controls were fluctuating wildly, responding to the ship's emergency power redirections. Sarah's hands flew over the control panel, implementing emergency protocols she had hoped never to use. "The temperature's spiking in sections 3 through 7, she reported, her voice tight with concentration. "We need to reroute power from non-essential systems." Marcus was already at the auxiliary control panel. On it, security systems can run on minimal power. Redirecting now. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency responses and last-minute adjustments. Through it all, Sarah fought to keep her precious cargo stable, knowing that each seed, each tissue sample, represented a thread of life that could never be replaced if lost. When the final launch warning sounded, she found herself gripping the edge of her workstation, knuckles white. The Horizont's massive engines roared to life, and Sarah felt the crushing force of acceleration press her into her seat. Through the vault's small observation window, she watched her home planet fall away. Earth, once blue and beautiful, now wrapped in layers of toxic clouds, grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light in the vast darkness. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. She had a right to cry for her world, even as she carried its future in her care. As the ship stabilized in its escape trajectory, Marcus appeared at her side. His usual stoic expression had softened slightly. "The captain says we're clear of the atmosphere. All systems are holding steady." Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she turned to him. "Did everyone make it to the cryopods in time?" "Most did. We had some delays in the civilian sections, but security teams got everyone secured." He paused, then added more quietly, "We're really doing this. Leaving Earth behind." "Not behind," Sarah corrected, placing her hand against the cool wall of the vault. "We're taking its heart with us. Everything that made Earth live and grow is here, waiting to bloom again on a new world." The ship's intercom crackled to life with Captain Matthews' voice. "Attention all crew. Course is set for the Kepler 186 system. Prepare for long-range transit. Essential personnel report to your stations. May God and science guide us to our new home." Sarah began her final checks before she would join the others in cryosleep. Each sample, each precious seed, represented a promise to the future. They had failed their home world, but perhaps with these fragments of Earth's biosphere, they could succeed elsewhere. As she worked, a sudden flare of light caught her attention. Through the observation window, she saw something impossible, a ripple in the fabric of space itself, a phenomenon unlike anything in their astronomical data. Before she could reach for the comm panel to alert the bridge, the Horizont shuddered violently. The last thing Sarah saw before the emergency lights went dark was the seed vault's status display, still showing green across all systems. Whatever happened next, Earth's legacy would survive. It had to. The Horizont's emergency system screamed back to life, bathing the corridors in pulsing red light. Sarah pulled herself up from the floor, her head throbbing from where it had struck the vault's control panel. The ship's artificial gravity was fluctuating wildly, making every movement a challenge. "Status report." Captain Matthews' voice crackled through the damaged intercom system. "All sections, report." Sarah stumbled to her monitoring station, fighting against the erratic gravitational pulls. The seed vault's backup systems had engaged automatically, but warning indicators flashed across her screens. "Vault stabilizers at 60%. She called back. "Environmental controls holding, but we're losing power to the cryopreservation units." Through the observation window, she could see nothing but a strange, shifting rainbow of light that seemed to bend reality itself. The mysterious phenomenon that had engulfed the ship was unlike anything their scientists had predicted. The Horizont shuddered again, its massive frame groaning under forces it was never designed to withstand. Marcus burst through the vault door, his security uniform torn and bloody from a gash on his shoulder. "We need to get to the escape pods," he shouted over the din of alarms. "Captain's orders. We're losing structural integrity in multiple sections." Sarah's heart clenched. "The vault. I can't leave the samples. They're all that's left." She frantically began the emergency transfer protocols, trying to move the most critical specimens to portable containment units. Marcus joined her at the controls, his security override codes allowing them to access the emergency preservation systems. "Take what you can carry. We have 3 minutes before the hull breaches reach this section." Together, they managed to secure a fraction of the collection. The most resilient seeds, the most vital specimens, the last examples of crops that had fed humanity for millennia. Each specimen they had to leave behind felt like abandoning a child, but time was their enemy. The ship lurched violently, and the artificial gravity failed completely. Sarah clutched the portable containment unit to her chest as she and Marcus pushed off toward the exit, using the walls to guide their floating progress through the corridors. They weren't alone. Throughout the ship, other essential personnel were making their way to the escape pods, carrying crucial supplies and equipment. Sarah saw Dr. Paddle from Medical floating past with an armful of emergency medical kits, his face set in grim determination. Pod Bay 3 is still operational, Marcus called out, guiding them through an intersection where structural beams had buckled, creating a maze of twisted metal. We need tow. His words were cut off by an explosion that rocked the entire section. Emergency bulkheads began slamming shut throughout the corridor. Sarah felt Marcus grab her arm, pulling her through the last opening just before it sealed, cutting off their view of the destruction behind them. They reached Pod Bay 3 to find Captain Matthews directing the evacuation, her uniform singed but her command presence undiminished. Dr. Chen. The specimens. Sarah held up the containment unit. Some. Not all. Maybe enough. Matthews nodded grimly. It'll have to be. Everyone in. Now. The escape pod was designed for 20 people. 23 crowded in, along with whatever crucial supplies they could carry. Sarah wedged herself into a corner, still clutching the precious containment unit. Marcus secured himself beside her, his presence oddly reassuring in the chaos. Through the pod's small viewport, Sarah watched in horror as the horizon began to break apart, sections of the massive ship peeling away like petals from a dying flower. The strange light phenomenon that had caught them was beginning to fade, revealing something unexpected. A planet. Impossible, she heard Matthews mutter. We're nowhere near Kepler 186. The unknown world grew larger in their view, its surface a maze of crystalline formations that caught and reflected the light of an unfamiliar sun. There was no time to marvel at the discovery. Their pod, along with several others that had launched from the dying horizon, was caught in the planet's gravitational pull, braced for atmospheric entry. Matthews ordered, taking manual control of the pod's guidance systems. This is going to be rough. The descent was a nightmare of heat, pressure, and bone-jarring turbulence. Sarah wrapped herself around the containment unit, using her body to shield it from the worst of the impacts. She felt Marcus's arm across her shoulders, helping to brace her against the violent shaking. When they hit, it was with a force that seemed to compress Sarah's very atoms. The pod skidded and rolled, its reinforced hull screaming against the crystalline surface of the alien world. Emergency foam deployed throughout the cabin, cushioning the occupants from the worst of the impact. When the pod finally came to rest, an eerie silence fell. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burnt metal and the soft hiss of emergency systems cycling down. Sarah's ears rang in the sudden quiet. Sound off, Matthews called out, her voice hoarse. Who's alive? One by one, voices responded. Of the 23 who had entered the pod, 21 had survived the landing. Sarah checked the containment unit with trembling hands. The specimens were intact, their stasis fields holding. Marcus helped her to her feet as Matthews organized their exit from the pod. The emergency hatch creaked open, letting in air that their sensors declared breathable, if thin. Sarah stepped out onto the surface of an alien world. The containment unit clutched to her chest like a shield. The landscape that greeted them was both beautiful and terrifying. Massive crystalline formations rose like cities of glass, catching and refracting the light of the strange sun. The ground beneath their feet was a complex matrix of smaller crystals, some transparent, others opaque with unknown minerals. But it was the movement among the crystal formations that truly caught their attention. Forms that seemed to be made of living crystal emerged from hiding places, their translucent bodies pulsing with internal light. They approached cautiously, their alien features unreadable. Well, Marcus said quietly, his hand on his weapon but not drawing it. "I guess we're not alone out here." Sarah looked down at the containment unit in her arms, then back at the approaching crystalline beings. They had come carrying the last seeds of Earth, hoping to find soil to plant them in. Instead, they had found something no human had ever dreamed of. The question now was, would these strange beings see them as allies to help or invaders to fear? Everything, their survival, the future of Earth's biosphere, perhaps the very fate of humanity, would depend on what happened in the next few moments. As if in answer to her unspoken question, one of the crystal beings stepped forward. In its translucent form, Sarah could see something that looked remarkably like chlorophyll flowing through internal channels. Perhaps, she thought with rising hope, they weren't so different after all. 3 days into their stay on the crystal world, Sarah found herself in what the Lumini called a growth chamber, a vast crystalline dome, where the alien beings attempted to cultivate their own form of plant life. The chamber was beautiful but dying, its crystal walls clouded with decay, the few remaining Lumini plants withering despite their caretakers' efforts. Nexus, the Lumini who had first approached them, stood beside her. Its crystalline form pulsed with bands of blue light that Sarah had learned indicated distress. "Our world changes," it communicated through a combination of light patterns, and Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. The seeds were preserved to give humanity a future. That's exactly what we're doing, just not in the way we originally planned. The Lumini aren't just helping us adapt Earth plants to their world. They're teaching us entirely new ways of understanding life itself. Nexus moved forward, its lights pulsing in what Sarah had learned was a pattern of peace and reconciliation. "We share freely with you," it communicated, the translator rendering its light speech into words. "Our world becomes your world. Your knowledge becomes our knowledge. Together, we grow stronger." Pretty words, Richard scoffed. But some of us haven't forgotten that humanity is supposed to stand on its own. Stand on our own. Marcus spoke up, surprising Sarah. "Like we did on Earth. We stood alone right up until our planet died. Maybe it's time to try something different." The tension was broken by an urgent call from the research center. Dr. Rivera, who had initially opposed Sarah's experiments, but had become one of their strongest supporters, came running out. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this." In the main laboratory, a holographic display showed microscopic images of the latest hybrid plant cells. The integration between organic and crystal structures had reached a new level. The plants weren't just surviving, they were evolving. "The crystal matrices are adapting to enhance photosynthesis," Rivera explained excitedly. "And look at this. The organic cells are developing new ways to channel energy through the crystal structures. They're not just coexisting, they're creating entirely new biological pathways." Sarah studied the data, her heart racing with the implications. This goes beyond adaptation. The hybrids are developing capabilities neither species had alone. She turned to Nexus. "We need to show this to your scientists." The Lumini's response was immediate. Their leading researchers assembled quickly, their crystalline forms humming with excitement as they reviewed the findings. The exchange of ideas that followed demonstrated exactly what Sarah had been trying to explain to Richards: the power of collaboration over isolation. As the day progressed, more discoveries emerged. The hybrid plants were not only thriving but were beginning to influence their environment. The crystal soil around their roots showed signs of transformation, becoming more hospitable to organic life, while maintaining its energy-conducting properties. "This is how we'll do it," Sarah realized, watching humans and Lumini working side by side at the research stations, "not by conquering this world or bending it to our will, but by learning to grow with it, by becoming part of it." That evening, as the alien sun set and cast the crystal formations in deep purple light, Sarah found herself in the quiet of the garden with Marcus. They'd walked between the rows of hybrid wheat, each stalk a testament to what was possible when different forms of life learned to work together. "Richards isn't entirely wrong, you know," Marcus said quietly. "We are changing who we are by doing this. The humans who leave this world won't be the same as the ones who crashed here. Sarah touched one of the crystal lace wheat stalks, feeling its subtle resonance. Maybe that's exactly what we need. On Earth, we thought being human meant standing apart from nature, trying to control it. Look where that got us. She gestured at the thriving garden. Here, we're learning to be part of something bigger, something better. Adapting. Marcus nodded. Like we always have. Maybe that's the real human strength. Not our ability to change our environment, but our ability to change ourselves when we need to. Above them, the first stars were becoming visible through the crystal dome of the growth chamber. Somewhere out there was Earth, the world they'd left behind. But here, in this garden of impossible hybrids, humanity was planting the seeds of a different kind of future, one where survival didn't mean standing alone, but learning to grow together with new forms of life. As if to emphasize the point, a soft glow began to emanate from the hybrid plants, a phenomenon they were still trying to understand. The light pulsed gently, resonating with the crystal formations around them, creating a harmony of organic and mineral life that would have been impossible just months ago. Beautiful, isn't it? Sarah said softly. Marcus smiled. Yeah, beautiful and new, just like our future. 1 year after the crash of the horizon, the landscape of the crystal world had transformed. Where once barren crystal formations stretched to the horizon, now hybrid gardens flourished in vast, gleaming domes. Sarah stood at the edge of the primary cultivation center, watching as human and Lumini workers moved among the crops, their movements choreographed in a dance of cooperation that had become second nature. Repeatedly, seeds sprouted only to die, crystal matrices shattered, hybrid attempts collapsed. But they learned from each failure. The Lumini shared their deep knowledge of energy transmission through crystal structures. Sarah and her team contributed their understanding of organic adaptation and genetic resilience. Slowly, methodically, they began to make progress. The breakthrough came when they stopped trying to force earth plants to grow in crystal soil and instead found ways to let them grow together. Crystal formations that could channel and amplify light, organic roots that could stabilize and enrich the mineral matrices. Two entirely different forms of life, learning to support each other. The first successful hybrid, a wheatgrass whose stems incorporated crystalline structures that strengthened it against the alien world's harsh conditions, was cause for celebration in both communities. Sarah watched as Nexus gently touched the small plant, its body glowing with joy as the hybrid grass responded to the contact, its crystal components resonating in harmony. This is only the beginning, she said, already thinking of the other seeds waiting to be tested, other combinations to try. We'll find ways to adapt more species, create new hybrids that can thrive here. Together, we can build something entirely new. Marcus, who had become a constant presence in her work, smiled. Isn't that what humanity does best? Take what we know, what we have, and find new ways to make it grow. Sarah looked around the growth chamber, where human scientists and Lumini researchers worked side by side, sharing knowledge, solving problems, building trust. No, she said softly. What we do best is learn to grow together. The seeds they had carried across the stars were no longer just humanity's future. They were becoming something more, a bridge between species, a promise that life, in all its forms, would find a way to continue. Not through conquest or competition, but through sharing, adaptation, and hope. The hybrid garden had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Where once crystal formations stood barren, now earth wheat swayed with crystalline stems that caught the alien sunlight, transforming it into energy that fed both the organic and mineral components of the plants. Sarah walked through the rows, carefully documenting each successful adaptation in her tablet. The third-generation hybrids are showing even better integration, she told Nexus, who floated beside her, its crystalline form refracting the morning light into rainbow patterns. The root systems are fully merged now, organic matter and crystal matrices working in perfect harmony. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm for this unprecedented collaboration. As she worked, Sarah caught sight of a group of humans watching from the edge of the garden, their expressions dark. Led by Commander Richards from one of the other survived pods, they had become increasingly vocal about their concerns. "Dr. Chen," Richards' voice cut through the peaceful morning. "We need to talk about these experiments of yours." Sarah straightened, feeling Marcus step closer to her from where he'd been helping collect growth data. Over the weeks, the security officer had become not just a protector but a true partner in her work, his practical insights often proving invaluable. "Of course, Commander," she replied, keeping her voice level. "What would you like to know?" Richard strode forward, his military bearing stiff with tension. "You're freely giving away humanity's entire agricultural heritage to aliens we barely know. These seeds were meant to ensure our survival, not become some kind of interspecies science project." "We're not giving anything away," Sarah countered. "We're sharing knowledge, creating something new that benefits both species. Look around you. These hybrids are more resilient than either Earth plants or Lumini crystal formations alone." "And what happens when they decide they don't need us anymore?" Richards demanded. "When they have what they want from our seed bank." He gestured at Nexus, who had remained silent, but whose colors had shifted to deeper, concerned hues. "We should be establishing our own colony, not becoming dependent on these creatures." The confrontation drew others' attention. Captain Matthews emerged from the nearby research center, her expression concerned. She'd supported Sarah's work, but had also needed to manage growing tensions within the human population. "Commander Richards," Matthews said, "Dr. Chen's work has full authorization. The success of these hybrids is why we're all eating fresh food instead of emergency rations. Food that's half alien crystal." Richards shot back. "We don't even know the long-term effects of consuming these hybrid plants. And meanwhile, our pure Earth seeds are being depleted for these experiments." The Harvest Festival was approaching, a celebration that merged Earth traditions with Lumini light ceremonies. Even Commander Richards, who had once been their strongest opponent, had gradually come to accept the new reality, especially after the hybrid crops proved to be more nutritious than their Earth counterparts. "The latest atmospheric readings are in," Marcus said, approaching with a tablet. He'd traded his security uniform for the iridescent work clothes they'd developed with Lumini technology. Garments that could regulate temperature and harmonize with the crystal environment. "The hybrid plants are changing the planet's atmosphere faster than we predicted. Oxygen levels are up 12% from last quarter." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The success of their experiments had exceeded even her most optimistic hopes. And the resonance patterns, stabilizing across all sectors. "The Lumini say they haven't seen readings this strong since before their decline began." He paused, smiling. "You did it, Sarah. You saved them. Saved all of us." "We did it," she corrected, watching as a group of Lumini children, their crystalline forms still small and delicately formed, played with human children near a patch of crystal corn, their laughter and light patterns mixing in the air. "All of us together." Captain Matthews joined them, her silver hair now streaked with the iridescent strands that came from long exposure to the crystal environment. The changes weren't just external. Regular consumption of the hybrid foods had begun to alter human biology in subtle but significant ways, allowing them to better perceive the Lumini's light speech and resonate with their new home's crystal matrices. "The council is ready," Matthews announced. "Both sides have approved the final draft of the integration charter." The charter represented something unprecedented, a formal framework for the complete merger of human and Lumini societies. Not just cooperation, but true symbiosis, each species bringing their unique strengths to create something entirely new. Sarah followed Matthews to the Great Chamber, a vast crystalline structure that served as their seat of government. Inside, human and Lumini leaders gathered around a table made of both processed earth wood and living crystal. At its center sat the original containment unit that had carried Earth's seeds across the stars. Now empty, its contents transformed into the foundation of their shared world. Nexus, now the head of the Lumini Council, pulsed with formal colors as the ceremony began. One cycle ago, we were a dying people on a failing world. The humans came, bringing with them seeds of life from their lost home. But what grew from those seeds was more than food or air. It was hope, trust, and a new way of being. Sarah stepped forward, placing her hand on the containment unit. On Earth, we had a saying, "From tiny seeds grow mighty trees." We came here carrying the last fragments of our world, hoping to plant them in new soil. Instead, we learned that the most precious seed we carried was our ability to change, to adapt, to grow in ways we never imagined possible. The charter was displayed on crystalline screens around the chamber, its text glowing with both digital precision and Lumini light patterns. It outlined not just practical matters of governance and resource sharing, but a philosophy of mutual growth and evolution. The hybrid gardens were just the beginning. Already their scientists were developing new technologies that merge Earth's digital systems with Lumini crystal computing, medical treatments that combine both species' understanding of life and healing. As the leaders began to sign, a soft hum filled the chamber. The Lumini's traditional song of celebration, now accompanied by human voices that had learned to resonate with the crystal harmonics. The sound reflected off the walls, creating patterns of light and energy that symbolized their shared future. Commander Richards, now one of their agricultural directors, approached Sarah after the ceremony. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I thought we needed to remain pure, to stay true to what we were. But look at what we've become instead." He gestured to where his daughter played with a young Lumini, their games involving both physical movement and light pattern matching. Something better. Sarah smiled, remembering her own fears and doubts when she'd first proposed sharing Earth's precious seeds. "Humanity's greatest strength was never in staying the same," she said. "It was in our ability to reach out, to connect, to become more than we were. Every great leap forward in our history came from sharing, learning, growing together. Vibrations that their universal translators were slowly learning to interpret. The resonance that sustains us weakens. Soon, nothing will grow." Sarah studied the failing plants, her trained eye noting how their crystalline structures were breaking down at a molecular level. The Lumini had explained that their entire ecosystem was based on crystal formations that could photosynthesize energy through complex mineral matrices. But something was disrupting the process, causing a cascade of failures throughout their biosphere. Behind her, Marcus stood guard, though the security officer had gradually relaxed his defensive posture over the days of peaceful contact. He'd taken to watching the Lumini with fascination, particularly during their light-sharing ceremonies that seemed to serve as both communication and communion. "How long?" Sarah asked, her hand unconsciously tightening on the portable containment unit she had barely let out of her sight since the crash. "Perhaps one cycle of our sun," Nexus responded, its lights dimming to a deep purple. "We have tried seeding new growths, adapting our own structures, but nothing survives. The resonance that once flowed through all things has become discordant." Sarah looked down at the containment unit. Inside were humanity's last hopes. Seeds that represented millions of years of evolution, plants that had survived Earth's worst catastrophes only to be carried across the stars. They were meant to be the foundation of humanity's new home, not. But what was survival worth if it meant watching another species die? "Captain," she called over her comlink, "I need you to come to the growth chamber. There's something we need to discuss." When Matthews arrived, her expression was already guarded, as if she knew what Sarah was about to propose. The captain had spent most of the past days coordinating with other survived pods crews and establishing a secure base camp among the crystal formations. "Dr. Chen." Sarah took a deep breath. "We have to help them." She gestured to the failing crystal gardens. "Their entire ecosystem is collapsing, but we have something that might save them. And us." "The seeds," Matthews said flatly. "Our last link to Earth. Our future." "Yes." Sarah placed the containment unit on a crystal table, its surface humming slightly at the contact. But what if we could make it their future too? The Lumini understand photosynthesis, just through a different medium. If we could help them adapt Earth's plants to grow here, find a way to merge their crystal matrices with our organic structures. It's impossible, one of their surviving botanists, Dr. Rivera, interjected. The biochemistry is too different. We'd be wasting precious resources on an experiment that can't work. But Sarah saw something in the way the Lumini plants caught the light, in the way their internal structures channeled energy. Nothing is impossible. We crossed light years through an impossible phenomenon to get here. Our ancestors turned wild grasses into crops that fed billions. If humanity is good at anything, it's adapting, helping things grow where they shouldn't. Matthews studied the failing crystal garden, then looked at the handful of humans and Lumini gathered around them. The seeds were meant to guarantee our survival. And they will, Sarah insisted. Just not in the way we planned. Captain, we left Earth because we couldn't save it. We watched our world die because we couldn't change enough, couldn't work together enough. Here, we have a chance to do better. The chamber had grown quiet, the Lumini's lights pulsing softly as they watched the exchange. Even Marcus had moved closer, his expression thoughtful. Finally, Matthews spoke. You're talking about risking humanity's entire botanical heritage on an unproven theory. I'm talking about sharing it, Sarah corrected. About planting our future here together. She opened the containment unit, revealing the carefully preserved seed samples within. We start small, test combinations, learn from failures, but we try. Nexus moved forward, its crystalline form refracting the light in complex patterns. You would share your life forms with us, even as we fade, especially because you're fading. Sarah selected a sample, hardy wheatgrass, one of Earth's most adaptable plants. On Earth, we had a saying, when you have only one piece of bread left, you share it. These seeds, they're our bread, our future. And yes, we'll share them. A ripple of light passed through all the assembled Lumini, a cascade of colors that the translators couldn't quite capture. But the meaning was clear: hope, wonder, gratitude. Matthews was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Do it. But Dr. Chen, make it work. The next weeks were a blur of experimentation. Sarah and her team worked alongside Lumini scientists, combining their knowledge of Earth botany with the aliens' understanding of crystal-based life. They failed. That evening, as the Harvest Festival began, Sarah walked through the celebration with Marcus. Hybrid food was shared on tables made of crystal and wood. Earth music played on instruments that incorporated resonating crystal strings, and everywhere, humans and Lumini mingled freely, their differences no longer barriers but bridges to understanding. In the center of the main plaza, they had planted a special hybrid, a tree whose branches were both organic and crystalline, its leaves catching and transforming light in ways that defied old categories of life. It was neither Earth tree nor Lumini crystal formation, but something new, something that could only exist because two very different species had learned to dream together. What do you think they'd say back on Earth? Marcus asked softly. If they could see what we've become. Sarah watched as the tree's crystal components caught the setting sun, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the plaza. In its branches, small creatures that were neither fully organic nor mineral made their homes, part of the new ecosystem they had helped create. I think they'd say we fulfilled our mission, just not in the way we expected. We didn't just preserve Earth's legacy, we helped it evolve into something new. Above them, the alien sun was setting, its light refracting through the crystal spires of their city in ways that still took Sarah's breath away. But it wasn't an alien sun anymore, not really. This was their home now, not the one they'd planned for, but the one they'd helped create, seed by seed, change by change, choice by choice. In the gathering dusk, the hybrid gardens glowed with their own light, organic and crystal components working in harmony to create something that had never existed before in the universe. It was beautiful, it was impossible, And it was proof that when humanity dared to share its last seeds of hope, entire worlds could bloom anew. The last light of humanity hadn't dimmed. It had transformed, becoming part of a greater light that would shine far into the future, guiding the way for all those who dared to grow together.